Clarity and dehaze are two common adjustments that can greatly benefit from tonal focusing using luminosity masks. The main clarity and dehaze tools that I use are the actions that you can find in the TK menu in the combo module, right here, dehaze and clarity. And also the dehaze and clarity adjustments that are available in Lightroom and in Camera Raw. However, I rarely want to apply clarity or dehaze globally because while they work well in maybe some parts of the image, they can really mess up other parts of the image. Just like with split toning, luminosity masks can allow you to focus dehaze and clarity adjustments tonally to just the highlights or the shadows or the midtones or wherever you want them to go in the image. So let's start with the TK actions and then we'll circle back to the Lightroom or Camera Raw adjustments in a minute. Using TK, you simply run the clarity action or the dehaze action. Clarity is done with a high pass filter that's blended with the image, and you set the radius of the high pass filter. If you want to adjust clarity in very small details, you use a low radius. And if you want to adjust clarity in bigger areas, and so if you watch in the snow, you can see that's the effect of a high radius. And as we make a smaller radius, the details that are getting clarity are getting smaller and smaller. In this case, we'd have to zoom into 100% to see the little small details that are being clarified in the rocks and other places. In this case, I'm going to use a fairly large radius to add clarity to that snow. Here's the clarity layer. It's a smart object layer with the high pass filter on it. And we can go back and readjust the radius of that high pass filter anytime we want. And there's the effect of the clarity. I love what it's doing in the snow, not so much in the rocks and in the sky. So to target that clarity to the snow, those are going to be the light tones. So I'm going to just come straight to layer mask mode and apply a lights 1 mask to that layer. That starts targeting that clarity to the highlights, but I'm also going to modify it with curves using the targeted adjustment tool to drag up the highlights and make those areas brighter in the mask, and to come into the dark areas and click and drag those down to make those darker in the mask. In that way, further focus that clarity just into the snow. It still is kind of causing a halo into the sky. So at this point, I would also want to subtract the sky, which can be simply done by making a sky selection. And like we learned in the first chapter, going to the mask calculator, selecting that active selection, and then clicking subtract to subtract the sky out of that mask. And now we've targeted that clarity just to the snow. Turn off that layer for now, and let's repeat the process, this time with the dehaze action. The dehaze action uses some more complex adjustments, ending with 2 layers that are grouped into this folder. This layer is applying the dehaze adjustment, and this brightness contrast adjustment layer allows you to adjust the brightness and the contrast of the adjustment. Usually leave the contrast up, but I can brighten it overall if I want. Again, if I want to target it just to the highlights, I would do the same thing as I did with the clarity layer. Come to layer mask mode, apply a lights 1 mask to that, and then use curves to further create contrast in the mask to really target that clarity to the highlights and keep it out of the shadows. At this point, I would have to decide, do I like the dehaze adjustment that I'm getting in the snow? Or do I like the clarity adjustment? Or maybe I like a combination of the two with lower opacity settings dialed into just where I want it. But let's say instead of with the TK clarity and dehaze actions, you'd like to do that with the Lightroom, or in this case, now that we're in Photoshop, the Camera Raw clarity and dehaze adjustments. They can accomplish similar things, but not exactly the same. And sometimes I prefer the Photoshop adjustments, and other times I like using the Camera Raw adjustments. So knowing how to do it both ways is useful. If you open the image as a smart object, then you can apply the Lightroom or Camera Raw adjustments using the same steps as we did in the split tone method from the last chapter. You would come to that smart object layer and create a copy of it. So there's that copy. Now we'll double click to open the top one. And here I'll come to the Effects tab, which is where dehaze and clarity are located in Camera Raw. And notice that we also have a texture slider. Clarity in Camera Raw is kind of like large radius clarity in Photoshop, and texture is more like small radius clarity in Photoshop. Here we have the ability to apply both together. And we can also apply dehaze at the same time. We don't need two separate layers for clarity and dehaze. So I'm wanting to affect the snow. So let's try looking at some clarity and see what effect that's having in the snow, and also some dehaze. I may also decide to, while I'm in here, bring up the exposure. You can see the really bad effect it's had on the dark areas, but I think I like the snow there, so I'll go ahead and click OK. And now at this point, the process is the same as we did up on these two layers. We need to find a mask that will focus that clarity and dehaze. So I'll come up to Layer Mask mode, load that Lights 1 Luminosity mask, come to Curves, get the Adjustment tool, come into the Light Snow, increase that in the mask, come into the Dark Rocks, decrease that in the mask. I really want to bring it out of those dark rocks as much as possible, somewhere in there. Let's see how that looks. Great for the snow. Don't like what it's doing to the sky. So get out of layer mask mode, make the sky selection, and then go to the calculator, click selection and subtract, and that removes it from the sky. If you didn't open the image as a smart object like this one, so this is that image, but I don't have access to the raw information in Camera Raw anymore, you can still utilize the Camera Raw clarity and dehaze using the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop. Unlike things like color balance and exposure adjustments, which really benefit from having access to that raw information, Camera Raw clarity and dehaze work just as well with rasterized images as they do with the raw data. All you would do is click the Camera Raw button in TK. This utilizes the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop, which is located right here. But it does a few other things for us. It creates a merged layer that is a smart object, and then it opens Camera Raw. And now we can go to the Effects tab where we have access to clarity and dehaze and apply those same dehaze and clarity adjustments that we did before. Can also lift the exposure a little bit like we did before as well. Update those changes back into Photoshop. There's that Camera Raw filter if I need to go back and readjust that. Now we follow the same procedure for creating and modifying and applying the mask. This time I'll increase mask contrast just by working directly with the curve. Again, to remove the adjustment from the sky, load the sky selection and use the mask calculator button to subtract that selection from the mask. All of this has been to show you how to apply different clarity and dehaze adjustments to highlights in the image. In this example, let's look at how targeting or focusing clarity and dehaze adjustments to the dark or shadow areas of an image can be useful. I want to try to bring out a little more detail and texture in these dark areas of the cactus that just didn't really expose well because of these bright highlights out here in the needles. I think that any of the techniques that we've learned so far, whether it's using the TK actions for clarity and dehaze, or going into Camera Raw and using those adjustments there, in a lot of cases, I really like using Camera Raw's clarity and dehaze adjustments because they're easy to use and because they can all be combined into a single layer. I have a raw smart object, so all I need to do is duplicate it and double click to open it in Camera Raw. And I am going to zoom in on that area of cactus, come to the Effects tab, and I'm going to bring up clarity. And I'm going to bring up texture, and the texture in this case, which is like small radius clarity, is really bringing out those details. In fact, I could even maybe lower clarity. That's another benefit of Camera Raw, is that you can do negative clarity and negative dehaze. So in that way, you have maybe even a little more control. I don't want to lighten too much. I still want those areas to be nice and dark. I just want to bring out detail. So let's say somewhere in there. Let's try that. But now if we zoom back out, we can see that that's having too much of an effect on all the bright parts of the image. That doesn't look how I want it to look. So now we need to target that to the shadows. I'm going to come to layer mask mode so I can do this in real time. This is going to be a darks mask this time. So maybe a darks 1 or a darks 2. I'm just looking at the image as I try those. Darks 2 does a good job of starting the focus. Let's go ahead and come into curves for modification. And just like we did before, down here in the dark areas, which are actually the light areas in the mask, I want to increase those areas in the mask, make them brighter. So I'm going to click and drag those up. And then I can come out here into this lighter area in the image and click and drag that down to keep the adjustment out of those areas. And I may want to come over to that curve and just really pull that over. And I am going to, for now, click OK on that and zoom in because I really want to see up close how this is affecting this part of the image in here. Yeah, it's doing a great job of bringing out that detail down in those shadows. If I want to try to target it even more, I can go back to my curves adjustment and use the finger tool to create even more contrast in that mask. I think that's as good as I can get it with this mask. Let's get out of layer mask mode, zoom out, and now take a look at the adjustment. To completely localize it to very specific areas, this would be a great place to use the masking a mask technique that I show in the basic course. We'll click the black side of the folder button, which will put that layer into a folder and conceal it with a black mask, and I can collapse that. Then I would just use a white brush and paint on the folder mask to just these areas of the cactus where I want it to go. That brings that adjustment into those areas and leaves it out of anywhere I don't want it to go. So localizing that adjustment, but the luminosity mask inside the folder is still controlling the tones where that adjustment is applied. So now that's become a very targeted shadow clarity adjustment. And one more time, let's just zoom in and see how that looks up close. Yeah, perfect. Just what I was trying to do. And in this final example, I find that clarity and dehaze on clouds can be great, but oftentimes I don't want it to be applied to the landscape, at least not nearly as much. Let's see if we can bring out this cloud texture and contour with dehaze and clarity. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that raw smart object and double click to get into Camera Raw and use dehaze and clarity. Yeah, to really bring out some of that cloud texture and drama. And now I'm going to come up to the light tab in this case and maybe bring up the overall exposure a bit, maybe the whites a bit, keep the highlights down, And maybe even bring up the shadows and the blacks a little bit to make it not so extreme. Something like that. Let's say okay. Let it update. Cool. So the clouds are looking awesome, at least right in this area, maybe a little heavy up here. And it's definitely having more of an impact on the landscape than I want it to have. So next I'll come to layer mask mode. These are the lighter areas in the image. So I'll go ahead and choose a lights mask to get started. So already that's doing a good job of allowing it to go into the clouds, but not the land. I'm going to modify that just as we've done before. So make the light clouds even lighter, make the dark land even darker. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, so now that's really having the effect I was hoping for. I still want to modify it a little bit. We've got some haloing along the skyline here. So another good opportunity to use the masking a mask technique. This time I'm going to put it in a folder with a white mask so I can mask it out instead of masking it in. With a black brush, I'll mask it out of where it formed the halo along the skyline. And actually up here in this corner and along the top, there's a couple areas where it was a little strong. Let's see how that looks now. Yeah. Excellent. I really like it. So whether you're using the camera raw, clarity, and dehaze adjustments, or using the clarity and dehaze adjustments that you can do in Photoshop with the TK actions, or any other clarity and dehaze adjustments that you might like to apply, when you can focus them with a luminosity mask, it's extremely useful.